Hello and welcome to Eco Girl in a Modern World. My name is Shelley and my channel is dedicated to talking about ways to be more environmentally friendly in a modern context. If you're watching this video at the time it posts, I decided to do something kind of different. This video is posting right before the 4th of July, and I am in the United States, so that is of course our Independence Day, and I decided to talk about a subject that kind of bridges kind of pertains to our independence from, also talks about modern development of buildings and how that impacts people and the environment, and that is
gentrification. To define gentrification is, gentrification kind of has some really deep roots. So to define it, you kind of have to go back to the beginning. The best way I understand it is actually kind of social media, not even social media, just media related. You've seen that on this channel we've talked a little bit about like some of the TV shows that influence. And one of the TV shows that you see is Bridgerton, right? And Bridgerton is based on like Jane Austen. It's the late, 17th, 18th century England, and the gentry. And you hear that word gentry, and the way that they lived and the way that they courted. So just to jump right in, we're going to talk a little bit about where this kind of lifestyle stemmed from, and how, that really carried over to the United States. It carried over to Australia. It really, England really kind of acted, any country that has royalty kind of influenced this kind of caste system, which does still influence the way that we build, and it is impacting our environment as a result of that. So to jump right in, I thought this was kind of a fascinating topic. Because the way that I kind of understand Gentry, and I'll post a few videos down below if you want to learn more about it, is, Gentry is the tiered class of the royal or the elite, or the relations of the royal family. So the way that I always like to think of it is, and there's several good videos, but if you look at Bridgerton, like if you look at that TV show, it talks about how important it is to find a husband, and how how courtship worked during that time, and in England. And what it is, to be an American, we're still very much influenced by that. It was true that that you had to be of a certain class to be around in the same kind of social sphere, social hierarchy as the king and queen. Now, before we get into the history of this, I just want to preface it. I am, of course, a big fan of the royal family. I mean, of course, the last video we talked about, I threw a themed party when the royal wedding happened. I drink tea. I have a teacup that was made in England. I really do like Prince William and Duchess Kate. I think they're a fun family. Just this last week, Prince William has taken his kids to see Taylor Swift, and how American is that, right? Also, Prince William has posted very, kind of fun and casual photos with his children, and honestly, his father as well. The King Charles, now King Charles, I'm so used to calling him Prince Charles, but King Charles, even when he was a prince, he was very dedicated to topics of environment. He's always been pro-environment, pro natural resources, and he, in the UK and England, they have a lot of policies that are very good. They do not allow GMOs in their food. And, it's funny, I had a friend who lived in England who said that she did not have any stomach issues while she lived there. But when she came back to the United States, she got all of the leaky gut and all that. We'll be talking about that more in a future video, but that just kind of says something, when your entire country has certain policies around it. But King Charles has always been very pro-environment, and actually a few years back, Prince William and Duchess Catherine, Kate, also attended Earthshot, which is a very environmental, it's like the future of environmental causes. So the royal family is very much about, maintaining a natural state. So I am a big fan. I have the Lifetime movie, and Kate, I have that Lifetime movie, in my collection. So I've always been a fan of the royal family.
But as far as it comes to gentrification, that is kind of important, because when you think about it, like when you watch Bridgerton and you see, the debutante balls, and you see the women curtsying to the queen and being very staunch and restricted by the rules that you follow, those rules really did carry over from England to the United States, and it does impact the way that we use land. It's interesting when you watch Bridgerton, or when you watch, like, there was a mini series called Queen Charlotte, like a Bridgerton story, which was based on the real Queen Charlotte, who was married to King George III. And King George III was actually known as Mad King George, because he was a little bit, he did suffer from mental illness. Later on in his life, he thought that he could speak to his children who had passed. So he spoke to ghosts, and he had outbursts, and sometimes he would have manic, episodes. So he was a little bit mental in the way that he did things. But, when you look at the story, when you watch the dramatized version of it, of course, you think, okay, he was a pretty good guy. And, to be honest, the dramatized version is very romantic. The way that they did it, they did hit on a lot of points of King George III and Queen Charlotte's relationship. And I'm actually going to post a really good video down below. The reason that I post this is not to be a history lesson, but in that video it talks about all the things that Queen Charlotte brought to the table, but it talks a lot about everything that King George III did too, and that's gonna play into what we're talking about with gentrification. Some of the things that they did in their lifetime really impacted the way that we use land, the way we own land, and the way that we create generational wealth here in the United States, which it has a direct impact on culture and on people and on the environment. And the way that worked was Queen Charlotte, just a little background, she was from a small German city, so she wasn't strongly educated. Even if you were a princess or a queen, women were not very educated, especially if you were of the royal class. You just pretty much expected to marry and procreate. You didn't have to work. And that was another thing about this gentry that I'll post another video below that's very interesting. If and you saw it a little bit in Bridgerton too, the moment that you're of a noble title, it is expected that you do not work. It's beneath you to work. So if a woman in the gentry class finds herself without money, whether that's via dowry or someone passing away or something happening to impact her money, it was like being socially outcast for her to have to work, because literally she would have to be a lady's maid, like a lady's companion, like almost like a spinster, or she had to be a teacher, or she had to like a governess, or she had to marry again very, very well. So they were very limited. People were limited, and honestly, Jane Austen suffered with this too. Her father was a pastor, and her one brother pretty much supported the whole family. The idea of her writing to support herself was frowned upon, so there's a lot of stigma here. And Queen Charlotte was no different. She was not very well educated, and she was pretty much just, they didn't expect her to marry as well as she did, that she married the King of England.
But when she married, one of the stipulations is that she didn't speak any English. She spoke pretty much German, and King George spoke German, so he was able to communicate with her. The other thing is King George really wanted to keep her out of government. He made it very, very clear. He said, you are not to be in politics. You are not to make any political decisions. He wanted to be in complete control, which makes sense. So you kind of married like a pretty, a pretty bride who will give you lots of children. And the way I kind of compare it is almost being like the first lady. Like here in the United States, you have the president and you have the first lady. And when you become first lady, you kind of have two choices. You can't really work because you're supporting, you can't go to a 9-to-5 job when your husband is running the country. So you kind of have just two options when you're a first lady. You can either be an advocate and kind of a philanthropic, sorry, I can't say that word. You can either give to the community, in a neutral way, of course, kind of like the Eleanor Roosevelt route, or you can really keep house, which was kind of the Mamie Eisenhower route, and that's why everything was pink. They even called it the Pink House at one point, if you watch my Barbie Core video. But, so you can either, be more of a welcoming kind of, host, to all the dignitaries that come to visit, or you can be a little bit more of an activist in the sense that you actually go out and talk to people, or you answer. I remember, there are some, I think, what is it, Betty Ford and Eleanor Roosevelt. Those were some of the first ladies who actually answered letters or read, went out and met with people. I know for a fact Eleanor Roosevelt actually went into the housing that was in DC to see how people lived. And of course the Great Depression. So Queen Charlotte was kind of in that vein of, her husband did not
want her to be involved in politics, wanted her just kind of to sit there and look pretty, but she had an expendable income. So when you watch Bridgerton and you notice that Queen Charlotte, a humongous elaborate wig, and the details pertain to the event, that is spending, taxpayers, your underlings' money, right? Our taxes are spent. Americans are picky about how our taxes are spent. In England, you were, you were a commoner, you were a subject of the queen, right? So, she spent the money and she did it on a lot of elaborate parties. One thing that was cool is that she did introduce several really beautiful kind of events and traditions. Like, for instance, her being from Germany, there in Switzerland and Sweden, there was the practice of decorating or putting candles on a tree, on a fir tree.
So Queen Charlotte was the reason for the first Christmas tree. And again, it was very simplified. The first, Christmas trees in the other country were very simple. But here, again, it's very similar to Bridgerton. She was doing it to host parties. Like each party was bigger and badder and better. And so, she did have one year, instead of there just being one candle on the tree, there were multiple candles, and then there were toys and elaborate, treats, sweets hanging from the tree. So that's why you have candy canes, all of that originated from England, and that originated. One other tradition that she brought over was the tradition of a debutante ball, which is why what you see in Bridgerton,
what you did is, and this was actually a good thing, because, if you go further back in history, if you go to Henry VIII and his so many wives,
there was a court of, if you were ladies in waiting, or if you served the crown, like if you were a servant of the crown, that's when you were in their social sphere. Queen Charlotte, almost like a first lady, kind of brought in the idea of saying, okay, if you have gentry, if you have certain levels, because when you think about it, royalty, a lot of royalty had, like Queen Charlotte, she had a lot of kids. I think she had like 14 of them. Not all of them lived, but she had a lot of kids. And every royal family seemed to do that. There were some families that were very prolific. And what would happen is you would end up with a lot of princes, and, not all of the kids are going to inherit the crown. So you have a hierarchy, where you have prince, you have viscount, you have baron, and there's a ranking, and each of those children are given something called a duchy. And a duchy is a parcel of land. It's a permanent, land was money then, and it gave you your income by, renting it, having, you leased it out, and by you owning the property, that's what invested you. So when you look at, earlier, you think, okay, it was a little barbaric because there was really no hierarchy in place to say, not to be weird, you look at, you look at some places in the United States where people marry their cousins, and it's absolutely repulsive. But when you look at the royal family, there was no other choice to keep the money in the family. They would marry cousins or distant relatives, and it's really it's pretty creepy. But when you're only keeping it within the family, that causes problems. So Queen Charlotte really looked to remedy that. So what she did is she started hosting balls for those landowners, for those people who were, knighted or parts of the hierarchy, given certain titles by the crown, and that title might not necessarily be by blood relation. So it did kind of bring in fresh breeding for them by being able to do that. Now so she did introduce it was technically her birthday, and she decided to create the debutante ball. But she did several themed balls, so it's very true to Bridgerton what they say. But the problem is that as these themes got bigger and bigger and bigger, it included only the gentry. It included only those ranks that were close to the crown. If you were a merchant, or if you were a salesperson, you were not included in this. So there was that, that separation, and the way that you came to own land was really at the bequest of the crown. The crown could say, oh, you did a great service to me. I'm going to bestow this land upon you, and you can be lord this, or you can be viscount this, or you can be baron this. And you are given, just like a duchy, you're given a parcel of land that is yours. And what happened was, and this actually really kind of started with King George III. And again, I try not to knock him, but in a minute you'll see he's the reason why America, broke away from, he ticked us off with some of these policies. But he really did this, just like in the Bridgerton series, he was known as Farmer George. Like, he really did love farming. He did love the land, which is to his credit. He took joy in farming things. But what back then in their time, before all of these lands were given to people to be landowners, before that it was public land. Like, you would farm on that land, you would grow crops, and it was like public gardens, it was public green space. And that's something we're going to talk about in a minute, because when you think about it, what are we missing today? Public green space. Everybody has to own everything. But back then it used to be public green space, and what happened was King George III got the bright idea to say, oh, well, I enjoy farming so much, I want to share this with those who are close to me. So all of those who are of my ilk, like the people who are close to the crown, I'm gonna give you. He started taking away the public gardens. He started saying, okay, this land isn't for public use anymore. This
land is owned by Lord, so and so. This land is owned by, Baron such, so and so. And that's what became the gentry. They began owning these lands and renting these lands. There were no public places. You couldn't just grow crops. So you had to pay rent to the landowners. And I'm going to post a video down below. This is a recent post by Shelbiz Lee, which I thought was really interesting because an episode ago we talked about aquifers and how important it is to conserve water and not use it for your lawn. But she has a great video about native plants. And believe it or not, grass, like the pristine lawns that you see, that is not an American plant. That's not a native plant in America. That is English grass. The very genus of your lawn is from England. And at the beginning of her video is very informative because she talked about it. She said, when you think about it, kings need short grass because they need to be able, it's almost a militaristic tactic. You have to be able to see if someone's invading. They also need really, really sprawling lawns for the same reason, to put you in distance between any invaders, right? And what is, and now what do you see? What is a hallmark of wealth? Having a bunch of land that's not used for anything. Like literally, her video is very informative. I highly suggest you watch it. Basically, the type of grass that we have planted is English grass. The reason that it goes brown so easily is because it takes a lot of water. Because when you think about it, it rains in England. It rains in England all the time. Does it rain in the Americas as much? No. So you have to water the grass more to make sure it doesn't turn brown. The very fact that you mow it, you keep it short, that makes it less prolific to actually grow vegetables because, normal grass, like grazing grass, is meant to grow long so animals can eat it, so it can grow long. So everything about a lawn is completely a carryover from gentry level opulence in England, but yet it is. So anytime, and it was interesting, she gave numbers. You think of how much land is used just for grass, that short grass. You don't grow anything on it. It's not native. It takes a lot of water. What is it there for other than to be a statement of wealth? I have money. That's all it says. All of that land, that's sprawling lawns that you pay so much money to water, that we waste drinking water to keep hydrated. It's not farmland, but it's us just trying to be the gentry of old English times. But basically, so that was flaw number one. King George III was the reason that you have landowners. And what happened was, it started really with his generation, and later it became a big
impact on the people who actually work the land, because they never own the land. They'd have to farm it and get crops they had to yield crops in order to pay the landowner, to pay the landlord. And that's where you get the term landlord. Don't you think it's a weird term? And we still use that today here in America, landlord. Oh, I got to pay my rent, right? But that stems, and what would happen is, if you had a bad crop, or if something failed, and later you do see that in history. You see points in time where it's like you could work the land, you could rent the land, but you could never own the land. And it happened. This is the source of a lot of revolutions. This is the source of the Irish Revolution. There was a potato famine. And honestly, the potato famine is very similar to kind of the Dust Bowl here in the 20s in the United States. If you don't switch out the different types of crops, you can deplete certain nutrients, right? And then
that same crop won't grow anymore. That's another byproduct of not, first off,
planting native plants, but also having more biodiversity. We're not meant to just plant the same thing over and over and over again, right? But in particularly in Ireland, they had it was more than just planting the same crop that played into it a little bit, but there was, and it might have been climate change, as well, because they burned a lot of coal. The industrial age really, we're doing it now too, but industrial age put a lot of carbon, from coal in the air. But back in the times, this would have been the late 1700s, there was a very, very bad potato famine where nothing would grow, and the potatoes were tainted. They were making people sick, and then people could not pay the rent and their landlords, and then they were getting evicted. And one good movie, if you ever want to watch some just dramatizations of it, kind of like the Bridgerton movie version, just to see what it was kind of like, where all of our patterns come from. There is a what is it? Last name Howard, Ron Howard. It's a 90s film. It's a little cheesy, but it's called Far and Away, and it stars Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and it talks about about landowners in Ireland. So it's almost like the English gentry in Ireland, and how same premise. Their crops weren't yielding, and a lot of that stemmed, a lot of the migration of Irish immigrants in the late 1700s to America is from that potato famine and not being able to own their own land. And so they were kind of revolting and saying, no, I'm leaving now. I need to go to a place where I can actually own my property, right? But that one's a good movie. Tom Cruise's accent in the beginning is really annoying. It gets better as you go along. The beginning of the movie, he sounds like Lucky from the Lucky Charms commercial. But the accent gets better as he goes. And then it culminates with the Oklahoma land rush. There was 1 million acres of land in Oklahoma. Technically, that got stolen from the Native Americans, and it seems like property just gets bartered or traded and tricked from people. But there's a video I'll post down below that we're actually starting to reverse some of this. But the Oklahoma land rush is where they were actually trying to get settlers to stake out plots and actually work the land, and with the option of owning the land after a certain amount of time. But that land was taken from Native Americans. But basically, so that was King George doing his thing. He really created the premise of land ownership, and we took that premise right over to America. We said, okay, you need to own land, you need to rent it out to people, you need to have sprawling lawns where there's nothing but grass. It was just very wasteful, but it was us trying to be like the royal family, right? The gentry, the higher up. And actually, that was another concept that when you hear in Bridgerton, you hear the word ton, T-O-N, and that is a French word to describe, it means well-mannered, it means polite. And what that pertains to is that, a lot of French seamstresses would make the elaborate dresses that the gentry would the clothes that they would wear in the presence of the king and queen, and in this, all of this courtship. And
but just like you see that there's a lot of rules with the royal family on how you behave and what you do, that's what all of these women would follow to be a proper lady, because if your reputation was tainted in any way, it could mean you being destitute. But the way that we really carried, and then the second thing that King George III did, of course, is he started, you had colonies in America, and he was taxing us like crazy, taxing us on tea, but we didn't have any representation. We couldn't say, just like these land, the renters of the land couldn't say how their taxes were used. We were paying, the crown, and we had no say. So, Boston Tea Party, no taxation without representation, right? We said, okay, we're not going to pay your high-ass tax on tea if we can't have a say in how those are used. So, and that was King George
third as well. He really, it was him that we were fighting when Americans fought the Revolutionary War in the 1770s. So 1773, it sparked off, right? But the way that it carries to modern day is you probably see that it's the same premise now. We talk so much about there being, an upper class and we always say, middle class. We put class as titles, below par, middle class, upper class. But when you actually look at it, and there's a video I'll post below, there really is no middle class anymore. The way that prices of things are going up, it is impossible to own a home and own a car. That American dream is becoming so expensive that it really has broken us into, I think we really have regressed back into the kings and commoners of the country from which we emancipated ourselves, because we are no longer middle class, upper class. We are working class, meaning, okay, do you punch a time card to bring home a paycheck that you probably live paycheck to paycheck off of? Or are you capitalist class, meaning that you don't have to work, you live off dividends, or you live off the rental income of property that you own? Are you a landlord? Are you a gentry, right? So, but more importantly, gentrification with the way things are built now is you will see cultural pockets of urban areas. So the gentrification that we think of is, there's cities and suburbia. After the Second World War, everybody wanted to move to suburbia. They call it white flight because everyone wanted to vacate. They didn't want to live in the cities anymore. It was congested. It was
closeted, and it was just compact, right? It was too small. So you build these big single-family homes that are more space than what you need. And when you think about it, what do we have now today? You have high-rise, apartments that are owned by LLCs that don't care. It's not a starter home. It's a tenement, right? So that's one choice. And then the other side of the pendulum swing are single family homes that are zoned just for these houses, and they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger mansions with sprawling lawns that you don't grow anything, that use a lot of water. So there's a missing middle, and I've talked about missing middle before, but that's where we're becoming kings and commoners again. I actually watched a very disturbing video. I unsubscribed from this channel because of how just insensitive I found it. But it was literally said, because it was a video about how you build generational wealth, which is true. But what they said is it was a very condescending tone, like, you're stupid if you don't do this. This is why you're poor. Or I think they even did a video that's like, this is why you're poor. You need to buy a second property right away. And I just kind of blinked, because that's entitled ignorance. Because what if you started off in poverty? What if you start off in, working level? I really think whomever made that video, and I will post it down below, they probably never had to work at 15. I think they came from generational wealth. That was most likely the person who wrote whatever that script that was for that video clearly was like a trust fund baby. They didn't have to work a 9-to-5. They didn't have to buy a first property in order to even be able to own a second property. That was probably given to them by mommy and daddy. So that just kind of annoys me, because that's the disparity that we're talking about. You have people who already own property who is able to pass it down to their children, aka gentry. But then you have working class who maybe started off poor or didn't have that much money to begin with,
and we're getting completely shut out of a housing market because there is no starter homes to be bought, and you have a choice of McMansions or tenements. And neither of them are built very well to begin with. But the gentrification is not only that, the disparity is that you do have cultural pockets, these cities that everyone vacated in the 40s to go out to the suburbs. These cities have a lot of culture in them. The people who live there, usually in abstract poverty, and there's actually a good book that a lot of what we see in the Gilded Age, from the late 1800s to the 1900s in New York City, or if you watch that TV show, The Gilded Age, you talk about the robber barons. It's almost the same thing that's happening now. You have all of the corporations kind of being trusts. They're owning so much, and they can dominate. There's no competition for resources because one corporation owns it all. And that's what the government really needs to get under control in order for us to not go through that again. There's a great book that's called The Gilded Age in New York City. It's by Esther. I'll put the picture up, but that's exactly what we're talking about here. The poor not being able to get their foot in the door, to be able to own property, to start with a starter home, and then, put that equity from a starter home into a bigger home, and then to a bigger home, and actually work their way up because there's no inventory and there's no opportunity, and all of the corporations dominate and there's no competition, because it's a trust. We need to trust bust, right? So that's one side of it. That is just like that's the Gentry side of it that we carried over, and again, we're in our mind, it's like, oh, it's the American dream to be wealthy and living that lifestyle. No, that is not the American dream. The American dream is to own the small home that's the perfect size for you, and to be able to move up with blood and sweat and tears, to actually start from the bottom and work your way up to the top and have that opportunity. And honestly, a lot of the younger generations are not getting that opportunity because we're not making the required changes now. But last but not least, the main gentrification that you see is that these urban pockets, that those poor people who stayed and lived in that area, they created a culture. And it's also the identity crisis that we have with fashion too. The reason all these aesthetics pop up is it is almost a little bit of cultural misrepresentation, because a lot of this fashion is based on the arts and the environment and the community and the culture that grew in these pockets, like Harlem, New York, or Chicago, or there's an arts district in Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore is steeped in creativity, and there's a depth there, and it stems from being a community and not having a whole lot of money, but it is it's the seed of the American dream in these little pockets of communities. And it actually even happened in California. There were bungalow courts, there were actual starter homes. Bookings did the same thing. They said, oh, okay, we're moving from streetcars to vehicles, right? So you can drive to suburbia and back. They displaced a lot of Spanish communities who were living there. It was their land, and it was kind of confiscated, just like with the Native Americans. It was kind of taken from them and bulldozed and put one big single family house that, or I forget what they built there. I think they built the Hollywood Bowl. They displaced like 1,700 people. But this is what you see, and that's what gentrification means. When you go in and you when you bulldoze an area, and then you build, what you do is you replace it, and the modern version of it that you're seeing is you're seeing them build, apartments, things that can be owned by LLCs and rented to people, but not starter homes, not missing middle apartments, right? And then it's above businesses, but it's very expensive, really ritzy businesses where you can pay $12 for a gallon of milk, but the people who are intended to live there can afford that, right? I'm also seeing that with a lot of homes too. We're talking, I've been advocating for so long, build 750 square feet to 1250 square feet, 1 to 3 bedroom homes, starter homes. But what you're seeing these tall townhomes, and I call it Belgravia. That's another show that you've seen, and that does also relate to Bath, England, and it's the upper crust townhomes, and even though they're vertical, they probably have each has the same square footage of a McMansion that's on a sprawling lawn. But what you're seeing this take over, you're seeing the, poor urban areas being bought up at cheap prices by LLCs. All of the residents are pushed out. And then they replace the beautiful existing architecture. It might be aged, yes, but there's an architecture there that's beautiful, and then you come in with all this modern stuff, and then you just make it, you make it mixed use, but you make it the ritzy restaurants that only the rich can afford. You make it the ritzy marketplace that sells the $12 gallon of milk. And then, the apartments that you build there would only be affordable, would be $4,000, Manhattan level kind of rent prices, and the person can't own it. So, and you're displacing the people who have lived there, and you're not helping the housing problem. You're not helping the other thing is you're eliminating a lot of green space. But this is, it's a big concern, as we look forward. The other thing is that it's, when we do all of this new construction, it doesn't necessarily give us real green space. It doesn't give us public places that I always feel like, you need a public space to which you do not need to spend money, a place to, like a lake or fields, or, some place that you can be without it being fiscal, because again, all of these places are about consumerism. It's all about, okay, the mom can afford to live there, but it, displaces people, and it changes the landscape, sometimes not in a good way. And this is, as we move forward, and say hi. This is Max. But this is the things that we have to think about as we are bringing about change. We do need to look at the environmental impact. We need to say, are there big green spaces? Are we building around the green spaces? And are we giving the land back to we need to serve the working class. If you have, if we redesign this to allow for affordable housing, the people who live there can not only continue to contribute to that culture, but they can afford to live where they have always lived. And you can also afford to buy the things in life that support economy, right? If you're not, house rich and lifestyle poor, you can actually afford to live and put money back into the system. And when you're able to buy things in addition to pay for your house and to own where you live, that supports us all. It reinforces the circle without there being pockets where something can collapse. So this was a little bit of a longer video. I knew this might be a little bit of history, but when you think about it, the purpose of becoming a new nation and staking a new claim was not to live by the old rules of the old world. I do believe that positive change is possible, but we really have to think about it, and we have to get away from this parallel divide between, kings and commoners. It's not supposed to be like that. There are supposed to be levels in between where it is an infrastructure that supports our community.
and we all work together to make this possible. And I do want to, be that vision, that American dream for the future, that you can achieve anything that you wish to do just by having the dream and putting hard work behind it, and that it's possible, that these structures of class and culture that have followed us do not dominate what is possible in the new world, right? So as we go into the 4th of July, as much as I love tea, I'm drinking some tea right now. I am going to invoke my, I'm going to be an ungrateful colonial. And I'll tell everyone in England, enjoy going to work tomorrow, because we're going to be celebrating our Independence Day. And, as we move forward with both our environmental goals and our housing goals and our economic goals, all of those really need to be hand in hand in order to make sure that we have a very green and prosperous and healthy, sustainable future. But I thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed. I promise the next video we're going to get back to some fun stuff, so I'll catch you then. Bye.